Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Murders of Lillian Ross by Sirena Van Schaik, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue. Recorded 11:17 a.m. Operator. 911, state your emergency. Caller. Inaudible. I need help. Operator. Where are you? Caller. Inaudible. Operator. I can't hear you. Please calm down. Caller, crying. 22 seconds pass. Operator. Hello? Can you tell me where you are? Caller. Oh God! Oh God, why did they do this? Why? Operator. Ma'am, I need you to tell me what happened. Inaudible. Note. First responders are sent to traced address. I can send help. Caller. Help? Inaudible. No one can help. Oh God, please no. Operator. Did someone hurt you? Caller, crying. They killed me. Oh God, they killed me. Line goes dead. Operator. Hello? Hello? Are you there? 911 call transcripts from the case People versus Lillian Ross. It was a world of whispers. The fluorescence buzzed quietly in the ceiling. The papers rustled as the small man in the gray tweed suit beside her, whose bald head gleamed with sweat, shuffled through his file. Even the footsteps in the hall behind the heavy door where guards marched past whispered. Allison heard the footsteps fading down the corridor, listening for when they would finally stop in front of her door, opening it to reveal the prisoner. The clock on the wall ticked silently, but Allison could hear each sweep of the hand as the seconds, then minutes, slid by. She hated waiting, but more so hated the feel of this place. It was a bright afternoon through the barred windows, and Allison longed to be outside again. She could feel the stale oxygen in here stifling, hot, the cloying mix of too many people crammed into the building and the artificial flowers from the air freshener. It was almost suffocating and made her head hurt. Allison glanced at the man sitting beside her as he shifted again. Ira shouldn't be here, she thought to herself, but I need him this time. It was hard for her to admit to needing anyone, and she felt a stab of guilt as she took in Ira's features. He was only in his 60s, but every line crisscrossing his pudgy red face added another year to his appearance. The only thing that remained youthful were his sharp brown eyes scanning the paper in his scraggy hands. Ira had been her attorney ever since her father had passed away from cancer a few years before, and while he didn't have to be at the meeting, Allison was thankful he'd come. Ira had carefully buttoned up his suit jacket, straightened his tie, and tucked the white handkerchief into his breast pocket before heading out today. Not once had Allison seen her attorney dress otherwise, either in the courtroom or the grocer's. Ira was a man of principles. Currently, his handkerchief was clutched tightly between his fingers as he mopped away the sweat pooling on his brow. Ira placed the contract on the table. The fingers of his free hand slowly thumbed through the stack of papers as he tried to look calm. I shouldn't have brought him, she thought for the 10th time since picking him up. He hated prisons. His practice was in contract law, and he rarely had to leave his office. But when she'd asked him, he'd come for her, and for her father, his best friend for over 30 years. He had spent the entire drive up to the state correctional reminding her that this wasn't in his job description, and then the conversation had taken a worse turn when he lamented her choice of careers. Allison ground her teeth just thinking about the plea in Ira's voice. Why do you have to write this? He had emphasized the last word. Allison had given no answer. How could she when she didn't know herself? She had been writing since she was a child, but after college she'd focused on true crime. She wasn't sure why the stories that actually destroyed lives were the ones she longed to put on paper. In the end, she supposed it was unanswerable. That was her muse, and she never felt settled unless she was pursuing a case. Allison arched her back to remove the knot slowly building in her shoulders before finding a more comfortable position in the metal chair. She knew who she was going to meet, who she was getting ready to interview, but she still didn't understand why she'd agreed. That was the source of her stress, not the fact that she was going to face with a criminal. Since launching her true crime career a decade earlier, she had waited in similar rooms for sociopaths and murderers many times. It wasn't the criminal who made her nervous. It was the fact that this one had sought her out, had begged her to write the story behind her. A loud click pulled Allison from her thoughts, and the door swung open to reveal the guard and her prisoner. Lillian Ross. The name seemed ordinary enough, refined even, yet this was a killer who had coldly murdered two men who had loved her. Allison wasn't naive. She was positive the two men had committed sins of their own, but there was nothing that could condone the way Lillian had butchered them. To say that Lillian Ross was breathtaking was an understatement. Even in the dingy Oran prison-issued jumpsuit, Lillian was ethereal. Her long limbs filled the jumpsuit like she was on a model on the runway, and her thick chestnut hair, with deeper tones of mahogany, shone in the overhead lighting, gold fluorescence be damned. Her deep green eyes had more of an almond shape than Allison remembered from the photographs. Lillian was thin, but she looked far from fragile. Allison searched the woman's face for resemblance to the photographs she'd seen, but the only features she recognized was the arch in her thin eyebrows and the plump, heart-shaped lips beneath a narrow, aristocratic nose. Gone was the blonde, blue-eyed beauty from the photographs. The real Lillian Ross was something much more breathtaking without the dyed-haired and colored contacts. A shudder raced up Allison's spine as the green eyes locked with her own. Swallowing her discomfort, Allison cleared her throat before standing up. "Miss Ross," she extended her hand. "I'm Allison McKinnon, and this is my associate, Mr. Ira Novick." Lillian inspected the outstretched hand hanging in front of her before she glanced at the guard and then extended her own. They stood there for a moment, each arm extended, fingers only inches apart, as though neither were sure what to do next before their fingers slid together. Lillian's skin was hot and dry. Her heat lingered on Allison's skin after Lillian dropped her hand to her waist and murmured a greeting to Ira. "Pleased to meet you." Lillian's voice was low and husky, the tones barely audible as she slid gracefully into her chair. Lillian glanced quickly at the guard, a soft smile twisting the corner of her lips. The guard shifted slightly at Lillian's glance, and for the first time since they'd entered the room, Allison really noticed her. The guard's deep ebony eyes matched her equally dark hair, and her large build made Lillian seem almost childlike in front of her. Everything else blended into the gray of the prison, a silent yet watchful presence in their meeting. "Miss Ross," Allison said after taking a deep breath. "Lillian, please." Lillian's voice was cool but rich. "Miss Ross," Allison continued, "because you have requested that I work on a book about your story, and before I actually agreed to do so, I wanted to go over a few things. I thought it would be better to meet face to face to discuss this, and Mr. Novick is here with regards to any legal matters that may present themselves, specifically regarding the legal releases." Allison winced. She wasn't usually this straightforward. People had a tendency to close up when she was brusque, and she learned quickly that being so was the worst way to get a story. Lillian stared at her, unfazed by her manner, before she directed her gaze toward Ira, studying him intently. Ira's color rose from the soft flush to an angry red under her scrutiny. "I know I contacted you, Miss McKinnon. I have no problem signing releases. I don't expect anything out of this except the opportunity to share my story." Her eyes remained focused on Ira. "But why now?" The question slipped out, and Allison cursed herself again for her unprofessionalism. She wasn't a novice, but something about Lillian made her feel like one. "I never wanted to before," Lillian said softly. "But as the years went by, I realized I owed an explanation for why I did those things." The room echoed with her words, and she was silent for a moment. "You know, there have been several books about the case." Her tone shifted. "None of them had my side of the story. None had any insight into me. They were just fluff. Sensationalism that sold a few books before fading into obscurity. I used to be fine with that, but then I realized I wasn't anymore." Lillian looked up. "I think it was the latest book about me, Deadly Debutante. Have you read it?" Lillian fanned the air with her hand as though she was clearing away a bad smell. "It was very funny and completely fictional. The writer made me a spoiled debutante who wanted to experience the darker side of life, claiming I'd reacted violently whenever I was told no. It was horrible. More horrible as I realized that I would be forever remembered as the debutante instead of who I really am." Allison shifted slightly and looked up at the guard who stood unmoving behind Lillian, her large hands resting comfortably at her waist. But why did you choose me to write your story? Lillian looked out the barred windows as she collected her thoughts. Finally, she answered with a shrug. I like the way you wrote. It's respectful. You stay with the facts and you don't sensationalize things. You keep things interesting even when you're citing the actual case. I liked that and realized I wanted your words to illuminate mine. You've read my work. The answer was obvious. Lillian gave a slight nod. Then you understand I've always written from the side of the victims and their families. My books focus less on what made the criminal do what they did and more on the impact of their actions and how the survivors carried on. I don't think I could write the book the way you want it to be done. There. She'd said it, her voice clearly implying that Lillian wouldn't get pity from her. If she wanted that, she would need to look for a new writer. No matter how awful Lillian's past could be, nothing condoned the slaughter of 2 people. Lillian smiled slightly, and her features were even more pronounced, her beauty clashing with the ugliness inside her, the same one that led her to murder. I know how you write, Miss McKinnon. That's why I chose you. I want you to write about the victim because, in the end, it is the victim who has to be remembered. The smile twisted as she said this, and Allison could sense that Lillian wasn't talking about the men she had murdered. While those words still echoed through the room, Allison nodded to Ira. With an alacrity that surprised even Allison, he explained the release to Lillian, allowing Allison to withdraw into her thoughts, which had suddenly turned dark.